Welcome to this tutorial. This one is going to focus on feminist theory. We're going to examine some key feminist concepts. We're going to explore different types of feminist, liberal, radical, Marxist, and different and post-structural feminist. We're going to make some synoptic links throughout, and we're going to link to some exam skills also. Okay, so instead of copying and making extensive notes on this video tutorial, we have got a summary table. I have added the link for you, and it looks like this. Okay. And if you want to type on it, that's brilliant. If you want to copy it out, that's okay. You might want to make it bigger, or you might want to have different sociologists on different pages. That is entirely fine. So just to start us off, a little bit of a starter task. We've got some feminist keywords, and what I would like you to do is match them to the explanation. Okay, so you can either write them out on revision cards, or you can do a poster or a table. But what I want you to do, just pause it there and just explore these, and we'll go through the answers in just a minute. Okay, so feminism. This is a movement to end sexism, sexual exploitation and oppression. Another keyword is patriarchy. This is this hierarchical structured society which men hold more power, put literally rule by father or rule by man. Sexism, the idea that women are inferior. We've got misogyny, the hatred of women, but also there's misandry as well, hatred of men. And this word that you might have come across during year one, male gaze, the way of looking through the world through a masculine lens, which views women as sexual objects. Okay, so hopefully you got those all right. So before we start filling in our table, I just want to take us through a historical view of feminism. Okay, so feminism is a movement that aims to tackle a systematic male dominance in society. It has been both a theory and a political movement. We start to see the roots of feminism found in the 18th century Enlightenment period. Now, what is the Enlightenment period? This is the belief that equality and liberty, along with reason and rationality, can liberate us from ignorance and create a better society. Now, both Durkheim and Marx both held this view. They were also part of the Enlightenment period, believing that their research could also improve society. Now, feminists would argue that the principles of equality should also apply to women as well as men, and that women's emancipation must be included as part of this Enlightenment project. So let's have a look at a little bit of a cheeky timeline so you can see what was happening. Okay, so we have got our first wave of feminists, which we would often associate with the suffragettes, and their main aim was gaining that right to vote. We started to see a second wave of feminists within the 1960s. They started to challenge the mainstream sociology, but generally in wider society, we wanted to see more social changes. And we've got the Sex Discrimination Act, Equal Pay Act, which started to occur. So we start to see a lot more legislation changes. And then the third wave of feminism is from the 1980s, and this is where we start to see our postmodern or post-structuralist feminist. Because before then, we assumed that all women were white, they were Western, they were heterosexual, they were middle class. And what we wanted to look at with the third wave of feminism is the diversity of women and their experiences. And these types of feminists start to deconstruct what it is to be a woman, and we start to see new areas of research. So there's a brief history of feminism. Okay, so again, before we get into filling in our table, we're going to start off with a research task. So you will need a piece of paper, and we're going to put the title SlutWalk and Feminism, and we're going to answer 3 questions. We want to know, what is a slut walk, basically? Why do women take part in a slut walk? What is said about the word slut, and arguments for and against? Okay, So our first one, let's just start to contextualize what I'm going to ask you to do. So what is a slut walk? Well, this was a new protest movement, and it all was sparked off by a policeman's ill-judged advice to women to avoid dressing like sluts. Okay, so a little bit more background. This constable had been given a talk on health and safety when he made these remarks. Here we go. You know, I think we're beating around the bush here. I've been told I'm not supposed to say this. However, women should avoid dressing like sluts in order not to be victimised. Okay, so we want to look at why do women take part in these slut walks? Okay, so we're going to have a look at the following links. We've got a news article there from the BBC, and we've got the Amber Rose. Okay, and you can use the internet as well and find your own research, but I want you to just bullet point, why do women take part in these slut walks? Okay, so pause it now and do this first one. Okay, so you might have found out about Amber Rose here, and she is talking about here that I deal with a lot of equality issues, okay, but these are slut walks to bring awareness to what is going on, wearing what you want, take part with what you want, and we should avoid dressing in a certain way to avoid being victimised. Okay, so you might have found out something about that. Okay, so ready for our next question? So now I want you to read the transcript. So what is said about the word slut? Okay, why do they use the word slut? Why do the organisers use it? What is it referring to? Okay, so I want you to read that. Again, link is there, and join back in when you are ready. Okay, so you might have had a look at this transcript on this website. Okay, and I just wanted to bring your attention to this little bit here. The word slut is an act of violence, not just metaphorically. It gives permission for people to rape us. The people that wields it do not have to lift a finger. It just sends that signal that this one is fair game. Have it. Have it, no one will blame you. Okay, so they're looking at the message that this word says. And what it does, okay, and you should have explored that a little bit further. Okay, so a final little bit that I want you to have a little bit of research on. So not all feminists agree with the idea of slut walk. So here's a TV debate here, and I want you to have a look at the different views of the idea of a slut walk, and as you watch, just put down ideas in favour and points made against the slut walk. Okay, and then once you've done your little bit of research, and we'll start to explore the different types of feminist, and we'll start to fill in our table. Okay, so let's have a look at our first theory. This is liberal feminism. So what is the main view? Well, these have got the March of Progress view. They believe that there has been steady improvements in the position of women. Attitudes have broken down. We've got more girls doing better in education. They've got successful careers. And key thinkers such as Anne Oakley, she distinguished between sex and gender, and gender is something that is socially constructed. It varies between cultures and it changes over time. And she believes that through different socialization processes and the way that boys and girls are socialized differently, that attitudes can change. So liberal feminist argues that having role models in education and the family will help change and challenge stereotypes, which will then encourage more girls into those areas. Okay, so we can see these social changes occurring within some of the topics that you've studied. So for example, in the family, we have seen a gradual change into gender roles. We've got more joint conjugal roles now, where we are sharing domestic tasks. Male and females are sharing domestic tasks. But also within education, we've got female teachers teaching in the traditional male subjects. And we've got within the media as well, challenging stereotyping. And you can look at Robbie's research that we explored how girls' magazines and the messages that are being sent to young girls have changed from the 1950s 60s to the 1990s, you can see the focus is more on being independent, career driven, those type of attitudes, rather than being a wife or a mother or getting a boyfriend, which was very dominant within the 1960s, 1970s. So with liberal feminists, we know that progress has been made. We know that there's been legislation changes. I want you to pause this and want you to think, what law changes have occurred that have been positive for women? Okay, and then join back in. So from the family, how many did you get? We've got the Divorce Reform Act, equalising the grounds in which men and women can get a divorce. Made a massive difference for women. In the past, it was often only men that could appeal for divorce, and women, if they did, they had to prove that they had either suffered some sort of cruelty or some sort of abuse. So it was very, very shameful for a woman to get a divorce, whereas with the Divorce Reform Act, the grounds being equal, that had a massive change for women. We've also got the Equal Pay Act and the Sex Discrimination Act. We saw women going into the workplace, and this has had a massive impact on the family. So it's not a direct family change, but indirect, in that we started to see women going into the workplace, and that meant that the roles that they did at home started to change. So we started to see more symmetrical families, for example. Within education, we've got the Education Reform Act in 1988. Now, this was equal opportunities policies that you started to see. That meant with the national curriculum, boys and girls had to study the same subject. There wasn't gendered subjects. Okay, you had that opportunity. And we've also got specific policies which were targeting girls to go into male-dominated areas. And you might recognise GIST and WISE, girls into science and technology and women into science and engineering. So well done if you caught any of those. So to evaluate, the fight of liberal feminists has led to legislation changes. You can see there's been a clear march of progress. They are very much in line with the Enlightenment period, or the Enlightenment project, where positive changes can improve society. They demonstrate that changes are not, differences between men and women are not inborn, but they are linked to socialisation. But they are accused of having a rose-tinted view. They ignore the deep-set structures that contributes to women's inequality. They ignore capitalism. They ignore patriarchy that is deep-set. It is embedded within society, and these structural changes are a bit harder to overcome. Radical and Marxist feminists would believe that legislation changes alone will not bring about equality. They argue that we need a revolutionary change. So they're accused of being a bit too nice. So let's have a look at radical feminism. Radical feminists believe that patriarchal oppression and exploitation of women is built into every aspect of the way society is organised. Patriarchy is the most fundamental form of social inequality. All men oppress women. The key thinker Firestone, she believes it's because women have the biological capacity to have children and care for children. It makes them dependent on men. That role creates that dependency. So according to radical feminists, men become the enemy in that case. They also explore this view as well. The personal is political. They believe that patriarchal oppression is not just in the public sphere of work, but it's also in the private sphere of the family and sexual relations. And what they did, these radical feminists, was they challenged things that happened within the private life, and they brought them into the public sphere. So just to give you a little bit of context, in the past, sexual assault, rape within a family was seen as being private. So what happened behind closed doors, that was happening within the privacy of somebody's home, and the police just did not want to get involved. And what these radical feminists did, they brought that into the public sphere, and they started to challenge it. So some synoptic links. So we've got the private sphere of the family, from family and household. We've got the domestic labour oppressives women. So we could look at the instrumental and the expressive roles and how that exploits women. We've also got men exerting their control through domestic violence and sexual assault as well, which often occurs within the family home. In education topic, we've got double standards. They exist as a form of social control, and I'm just making reference to Sue Lee's research into slag and drag. So these are the double standards that exist between boys and girls and any sexual exploits that they get up to and whatever. So when boys experience any sexual experiences, they're seen as being in a positive way. It's like, oh look, he's a man, he's quite masculine, whereas when girls do it, they're seen as a slag. Okay, and her research, there is this double standards between how boys and girls are treated, and if they don't do anything, the girls, they're seen as being a drag. We've also got this term, the male gaze. It was one of our keywords from the beginning. This is a form of surveillance. We start to see it in education, we see it in the workplace and in public, where girls are seen as sexual objects, and this then controls their behaviour. In the public sphere of the workplace, there is a glass ceiling, and within politics, there is a domination of males. Now, radical feminists go a little bit further than liberal feminists. They don't believe that it's just legislation change. They believe that more radical change is needed. So we've got the radical feminists such as Germaine Greer. She argues for the creation of matrilocal households called separatism, living apart from men. We've also got collective action and shared experiences. So SlutWalk marches, Me Too movements. So making it really public, and through political lesbianism, they believe that the heterosexual relationships involve sleeping with the enemy. So they believe that women should become lesbians in that way. Okay. So to evaluate, they bring the attention of the personal political, revealed how intimate relationships also involve domination. They brought the things that are happening in the private into the public sphere, and that is a really, really good thing. But it assumes that all men oppress women. Not all men oppress women, not all men are violent to women. It also ignores female violence against men. And not all women suffer patriarchy in the same way. Marxist feminists argue that it's class, not patriarchy, that causes inequality. We'll explore Marxist feminists next. And liberal feminist argues that women's position has improved. We've got legal reform, we've got law changes, and there's also a change in attitudes towards gender equality. It shows that change is happening. They also advocate separatism, so men and women living separately, which is really unrealistic, and I don't think that's going to happen, but not in a widespread case anyway. So here's our third part, which is Marxist Feminist. So before we start, let's do a quick recap. What do Marxists believe and how do they see society? I want you to list 3 keywords that you would associate with Marxist theory. Okay, so you might have identified that Marxists see society based on this thing called capitalism, and we've got words like exploitation, ideology, the bourgeoisie, the proletariat, some of the key words just to help you recap. Okay, so another little bit of a thinking task. I want to explore this picture, and I want you to look carefully and what does it tell you about the role of women? You might want to think about her role, but also about the male role as well. Why is it essential for capitalism? So make some notes. Describe what is society like. Is it relevant? Is this relevant today? Why not? So let's start to explore this picture in a little bit more detail. We've got the role of women, which is in the home, and they're looking after, they're cooking, they're cleaning, and they're looking after their man, home sweet home, and these men are being packed off with their packed lunches back into that capitalist factory where they come out again all stressed, and the woman's role is to make them all nice again. So in a bit more detail, Marxist feminists argue that patriarchy suits the capitalist system as well as men. We've got Fran Ansley, and just thinking back at that picture, women are the takers of shit, our favourite feminist use words. And the women are the takers of shit. Why? Because they are soaking up the frustrations of capitalism. They are absorbing the anger of the proletariat man. They feel alienated in work. They're exploited in work. And this is taking the form of domestic violence that women suffer, which means that instead of taking the anger out at the capitalist bosses or the bourgeoisie, they're taking it out on the women, these proletariat men. But what the women also do, they are reproduction of the labour force, they're having children, they're producing the next generation of workers, but they're also cheap labour for capitalism as well. Women are paid less than men, they're more likely to work part-time, and it is often assumed it's because the man is the main wage earner. But also they are a reserve army of labour as well. So during economic booms or times of crisis, women can often step up as a reserve army. We saw that during the Second World War. Okay. So some synoptic links. Okay, so we can link this to the family, the ideology of feminism. Nuclear family is presented as being natural and the only place that fulfillment can occur. And this is ideological. And we know it's ideological because according to Marxist feminists, the nuclear family is really, really dangerous for women because they are soaking up the frustrations of capitalism. They are often suffering domestic violence because of this capitalist system. Now, in order for women to accept that place, we need to brainwash them to a certain extent, and this is where ideology comes in. So ideology dictates that we see the nuclear family and the division of labour as being normal and natural, and that they send the message that the nuclear family is the only place for motherhood, intimacy and sexual satisfaction can occur, and it can't occur anywhere else. And these messages are being sent to women. So even though we know that women often suffer domestic violence, we still are reproduced to go in them. Okay, and Michelle Barrett argues that we should not just overthrow capitalism, but we need to get rid of the ideology of the family as well. And that's the only way that we're going to challenge both capitalism and patriarchy. So to evaluate, it has given us a greater understanding of women's exploitation, and it is essential to understand the role of women in a capitalist economy, linking those two parts together. But it fails to explain patriarchy and women's oppression in non-capitalist societies. So not every society is capitalist, but patriarchy exists in those societies. Unpaid domestic labour may benefit capitalism, but it doesn't explain why it is women and not men who perform it. So this theory is accused of being sex blind. And it also ignores the idea that women can be the breadwinner within the nuclear family. Okay, so that's our third feminist. Moving on to our final feminist. These are difference or post-structuralist feminism. So difference feminist. Now they disagree with all the other types of feminist because the other types of feminist all assume that all women live in a nuclear family and they share the same experiences. And these feminists believe we can't generalize about women in the same way. They believe that women will have different experiences due to their class, ethnic background and sexual orientation. These feminists accuse the other feminist of essentialism, assuming that women have the same essence of what it is to be a woman. They fail to recognise the differences between women's experiences. So let's link it to the family. So feminists often assume that women live in a heterosexual nuclear family sharing similar experiences of family life, but we should avoid generalising that. For example, often viewing the family as being negative, white feminists ignore black women's experiences of racial oppression. Black feminists view the black family as a source of support against racism, whereas the white feminist might see the family as being a source of oppression. So we're looking at the family in two different ways. And as a development from difference feminist, we've got post-structuralist. Now, they're very similar to difference feminist. There is no universal woman. They're not all the same. And there's not one way in seeing, thinking, or speaking about women. Okay, so seeing and thinking and speaking about the world is called a discourse, and at any one time there are lots of different discourses, different ways of thinking and speaking about things in general, and they apply it to the study of women. So there is no fixed thing called womanhood. There is no fixed way of speaking about women and thinking about women. So post-structuralism enables feminists to deconstruct or analyse the different discourses, the different ways of thinking and speaking about women, and women's experiences, to reveal how women are oppressed. And they go into newer areas of research, such as medical, or the medicalisation of childbirth, pornography, art, religion, and advertising. So we start to see new areas of research because we start to explore them from different angles, from different ways. So to evaluate these final views, they are very positive. They recognise the diversity of women's experiences, but despite being differences between women, there are important similarities. For example, patriarchy. Women are more likely to experience low pay, domestic violence and sexual assault compared to men, and that is what unites women. Celebrating the differences may also divide women, which might weaken feminism overall. And it also ignores the structure of society that does influence women's oppression. It ignores the deep-set patriarchal structures, and it ignores the role of capitalism in their exploitation. Whew. So we have got 4 different types of feminists. This video tutorial has gone through the historical views, you've done research into SlutWalks, and you've explored the 4 different types of feminists. Any links are below. And if you've got any questions or any comments, please leave them for me and click that like button. Thank you for watching, and I shall see you again for the next one. Bye.